first encountered the term acid house, they misconstrued it. In Chicago, acid came from acid burn, slang for ripping off someone's idea by sampling it. But in Britain, it was assumed that acid meant psychedelics, so acid house became the soundtrack for the ecstasy revolution, and another classic example of British youth misrecognising and remotivating a black American music. Hardcore techno has reversed the drug-music nexus. After 4 years of rave culture, the music has evolved into a science of inducing and amplifying the E-rush. The vibe has changed, from trance dance to mental manic, as ecstasy has become adulterated with amphetamine, or replaced by pseudo-E concoctions of speed, LSD and God knows what. Chemicals have directly altered the subculture's metabolism, with beats per minute blast count at 140 to 150 BPM, soaring in sync with pulse rate and blood pressure levels. E and LSD activate the fight or flight sector of the brain. In combination with amphetamine, the result is an edgy exhilaration on the borderline of panic reaction. Light feeling, wobbly, xenophobia's the wobbling quiet time. Hardcore is just another form of thin heel panic culture. Hence the frequent samples of sirens, the ambicades of sound, the MCs chanting, coming at you. But then in Greek, panic's original meaning was a transport of ecstasy. Speedy E's changed the whole vibe of rave culture, from a celebration to a sort of aggressive euphoria. The urge to merge and the urge to surge fuse in a raging oceanic feeling. Dancers' faces are contorted with weird expressions midway between the snarl and the smile, or glare with blaze, craze, impudence. It's the most brazenly druggy subculture in eons, even less coded than acid. So the DJs send out a big shout to all you nutties rushing out of your heads. Speed freaks out there, you know the score. Or holler, yes London town, absolutely flying in the studio, 100 miles an hour. Are drugs essential to get into this music, as hardcore detractors claim? Well, they certainly help hype your metabolism to the necessary phonetic pitch. But once your nervous system has been reprogrammed, you can listen to the stuff on the natural. It will induce memory rushes and body flashbacks. Speed has mutated, some say perverted, rave music's development, unbalancing it at both the top and bottom ends of the sound spectrum. Hardcore is an ultra-shrill treble and a bar-breaking bass. Voices are sped up to a 78 RPM pinky and perky shriek, whether they're samples of ethereal girls like Kate Bush, Lisa Gerrard, Liz Cocteau or Stevie Nicks, or helium eruptions of black voices, close to fireworks and soul. These vocals have been hurtled beyond expression into the realm of abstract urgency, outside the syntax of desire. Sampled and modulated on a keyboard, they've become a barrage of intensities without pretext or context. Shudders and shivers that are not so much inhuman as infrahuman. Incantations from roots reggae are snatched from their cultural context to become animated hieroglyphs. Ragga chants add a grainy insolence to perfect for hardcore's rough and tough uproar. Dub bass impacts your viscera. Alien meter placed outrageously amid accelerated hip-hop breakbeats at twice regular pace. Having swallowed hip-hop whole, hardcore syncopation is a radical break with the program machine rhythms of early UK techno. The electronic side of techno has degenerated into stray smears of acid bass, pulsation loops derived from Joey Beltram's energy flash and mentrism, fucked up concatenations of blaring samples, and octave skipping synths and riffs whose function is not melodic but textural. And of course, the sheer speed of their oscillation accentuates the sense of the headlong rush. At raves and clubs or on pirate stations like Touchdown 94 FM, Defection, Pulse or Rush, DJs can pack rough and ready chunks of tracks into relentless but far from seamless intertextual tapestries of scissions and grafts. It's a gabbling fucking mess, barely music, but as it swarms out of the airwaves to a largely proletarian audience, you know you're living in the future. It's trash, but I love it. It's a mistake to appraise hardcore in terms of individual tracks, because this music only really takes effect as total flow. Its meta-music pulse is closer to electricity than anything else. Hardcore has abandoned the remnants of the verse-chorus structure retained by commercial rave music. At the Castle Morton Common Mega Rave in May, MCs chanted, "We've lost the plot." Hardcore abolishes narrative. Instead of tension, climax, release, it offers 1,000 plateau of crescendo, an endless succession of nows. This is an apocalyptic now for sure. Hardcore fits only too well the model of the terminal culture Paul Virilio prophesizes in the aesthetics of disappearance. A switch from the extensive time of history to the intensive time of momentariness without history. This emergent anti-culture of instantaneity will be inhabited by a new breed of schizophrenic subject whose ego is made up of a series of little deaths and partial identities. No narrative, no destination. Hardcore is an intransitive acceleration, an intensity without object. That is why MC Patter sounds more appropriate for a roller coaster than music. Hold tight, let's go, hold it down. And that's why techno is all that you'll hear at fairgrounds these days. Does this disappearance of the object of desire, this intransitive intensity, make hardcore a culture of autistic bliss? Utterly sex, as the central metaphor of dancing seems remoter than ever. Rave dancing doesn't bump and grind from the hip, it's abandoned the model of genital sexuality altogether for a kind of polymorphous, perverse frenzy. It's a dance of ticks and twitches, jerks and spasms, the agitation of the body broken down into individual components, then reintegrated at the level of the entire dance floor. Each sub-individual part, a limb, a hand cocked like a pistol, is a cog in a collective desiring machine, which is why dancers so readily pick up each other's moves. The dance floor is like a primal DNA soup. It's pagan too, this digital Dionysian derangement whose goal is to find an asylum in madness. Hence the slang of mental and nutty. Sound systems with the names like Bedlam, groups with the names like Lunacry, and MCs chanting "I'm off my fucking tree." Pejoratives are turned into desirable states of mindlessness. This is emotionally regressive too, as all the musically progressive genres of the last decade, rap, oceanic rock and noise have been. Hence the infantilism of ravers sucking on dummies or bubblegum chart hits like A Trip to Trumpton, Sesame's Treat or The Prodigy's Charlie. But then Virilio reminds us that child society frequently utilises turning, spinning around, disequilibrium, and looks for sensations of vertigo and disorder as sources of pleasure. He cites Jacques-Henri Latigue's childhood game of spinning round and around in order to create a dizziness that reduced the environment to a sort of luminous chaos. Virilio's book is a Jeremiad about an emergent culture based around pycnolepsy, his term for frequent, incredible brief ruptures in consciousness. Pycnolepsy is a take on epilepsy, which Webster's defines as a disorder marked by disturbed electrical rhythms of the central nervous system and typically manifested by convulsive attacks, usually with clouding of consciousness. Epilepsy was a sacred malady for the Greeks. Hardcore is poised somewhere on the brink between pycnolepsy and epilepsy. We all know how strobes, staple of the Rave light show, can cause convulsions. Hardcore is the auroral analogue of the strobe, a sequence of frozen stopgap sound bites that have been artificially reanimated with electricity. Virilio could be writing about the rave scene in 1992, with the irregularity of the epileptic space, defined by surprise and unpredictable variations of frequencies. It's no longer a matter of tension or attention, but a suspension of pure and simple. The disappearance and effective reappearance of the real, the departure from duration. This is the feeling that the KLF caught with the title, and if not the sound of 3 AM Eternal. Speed reproduces the effect of pycnolepsy, perpetual repeated hijacking of the subject from any spatial temporal context. You're gone, you're totally out there. And there's more. A warning sign for epileptics of an imminent attack was a special state of happiness, a juvenile exhilaration. Sublime, wrote Dostoevsky, a sufferer. For that moment you'd give your whole life. At that moment I understood the meaning of that singular expression. There will no longer be time. This juvenile nihilism is the reason why hardcore pursues so many. This music is best understood as a neurological, not cultural phenomenon. It abolishes the role of cultural mediators. Textless, it offers little to interpret itself. Its subcultural text resides in the effects. Critics who like to deal with rock and roll as a surrogate form of literature are the most threatened by this anti-humanist noise, which is closer to a power source or intoxicant than poetry. But hardcore also challenges those who have seized on the more musically participants in rave music to argue the case for house and techno as art forms. There is a prejudice against the one-dimensional music. It is both amazing and amusing to see how exactly the same rhetoric is used by detractors of 50s rock and roll recurs as a knee-jerk tick amongst rock fans when they're faced by the new barbaric non-music. One of the things most feared about rock and roll is its extreme repetitiveness, which is exactly what the anti-hardcore enclaves bemoan. Repetition is a psychoactive agent itself, of course. Anyway, to those who insist that hardcore just isn't music, I won't argue, I couldn't care less. But I do know that every development in pop, from punk to rap to acid house, has initially been greeted with such spasms of fear and loathing. By the 1960s and early 70s, British groups bastardised the blues, and their American imitators bastardised their bastardisation, and between them, they spawned heavy metal. In the late 80s, black Europhiles from Chicago and Detroit took Teutonic electronic music and turned it into acid house and techno. In the 90s, British youth took these styles and birthed a mutant, bastard form called hardcore. Veterans of 1988's first wave of rave denounced hardcore in exactly the same language that counterculture vets decried metal, as soulless, macho, bombastic proto-fascist, a corrupt and degraded version of a once noble tradition. They've even called hardcore the new heavy metal, with the same piety that people once harked back to Cream and deplored Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. Similarly, Rave, Continuum, mourned Derek May, and flinched from the same brutalism of Beltram and Two Bad Mice. In an unfortunate echo of prog rock, some have even erected the concept of progressive house. For example, the Future Sounds of London, The Orb and Guerrilla Records, as a bulwark of good taste against the hooligan hordes of hardcore. Well, history shows us that the despised Black Sabbath subsequently went on to be perhaps the biggest influences on alternative rock in the 80s and 90s, from Black Flag through to Butthole Surfers to Seattle grunge, while Jethro Tull, ELP and Pink Floyd went to influence practically nobody. Maturation was always one possible route of the development for the music of the post-acid diaspora. Like heavy metal did with blues rock, hardcore has taken the essence of acid house and techno, mindless repetition, stroboscopic synths and bass quaking frequencies, and coarsened and intensified it. As with metal, bad drugs, barbiturates then, dodgy E now, helped them focus on that essence. To an extent, hardcore just present a spectacle of degraded avant-gardism, of arrested futurism, headless chickens running wild with avant-garde techniques, timbral, textural, spatial renovation rather than melodic harmonic development, drone theory, extreme repetition, extreme randomness and musique concrete, etc., but not really knowing how to build with them. But hardcore advances, not through the innovation of matures, but rather evolve through mutation. Inspired errors and random fucking about produce new riffs and noises that succeed in the dancehall ecosystem and then enter the gene pool. Which explains why, whenever someone does come up with a new idea, it's ripped off 1,000 times. Anyway, I wager that for those looking for the next revolution, would do better to watch what crawls out of the hardcore morass than to carry a torch for Detroit, LFO or Orbital, as inspired as they have all been in their day. Hardcore is really just the latest twist on the traditional contours of working class leisure. The latest variant of the sulfate-fueled 60-hour weekend of modern soul. With hardcore, the proletarian culture of consolation has become a culture of concussion, hence the amnesiatic, anesthetic slang terms for a desirable state of oblivion, such as sledged as in sledgehammered, mashed up, cabbage, monged, and subtitles like blackout and hypnoblast. There's a sample slice of rap at large and hard that goes, can't beat the system, just go with the flow. On one hand, it's just a boast about how much damage the sound system can inflict. But perhaps there's a submerged political resonance in there too, amidst the socio-economic deterioration of a Britain well into its second decade of one-party rule, where alternatives seem unimaginable, horizons grow even narrower, and there is no constructive outlet for anger. What else is there left but to zone out, go with the flow, and disappear? But retreatism is just one side of the rave scene. There's an inchoate fury in the music that comes out in the urge for total release from constraints, a lust for explosive exhilaration captured in titles like Hypergasm. The ragga chant of xenophobia's Rush the House kicks off. E come alive, E come alive. Hardcore frenzy is where the somnambulous youth of Britain snap out of the living death of the 90s and grasp a few moments of fugitive bliss. Hardcore seethes with a rage to live, to cram all the intensity absent from a week of drudgery into a few hours of fervour. It's a quest to reach, escape velocity. Speed freak youth are literally running away from their problems, and who can blame them?